Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we're going to be reacting to a video from Chisgule on the recent Dragonfall KVK season, or SOS3, titled Team Formation, looking great so far. I think there's some juicy bits in here, so let's go ahead and dive right in. As always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up, because it helps out a lot. Here we go.
About this, and we have more information than we had in the prior video where I was speculating about how this would work. Now we can talk a little bit about how it's actually worked out, and let me explain. In case you haven't been following along with the videos I've been making, there's a new season in Call of Dragons. It's called Dragonfall, up on screen here. And the developers must have observed the same thing I observed and many of you in the community observed, which is that the biggest kingdoms in the game were not setting up good seasons. They were creating easy seasons, easy wins, not even getting fights in the final zone, which is the most exciting part of the game. And it's unsurprising to me anyways, but it is very surprising to them that some of those big kingdoms are starting to fall apart, because if you can't deliver your fighters fights, they're gonna leave, which means you're left with only non-fighters. But that's a bit of a tangent. I've covered that in prior videos. The developers
So what he's probably more referring to here, and keep in mind, this isn't a lot of kingdoms. Again, most notably, this would probably be, again, if you're just going off of notoriety, more so 23 with the TFS situation where you had some of the Echo people that left. Obviously, that was a little bit different, but then the later portion was when ANCS came into 23, and they had basically still two main alliances. They were basically bigger and stronger than they were when Echo left, again, on paper, but they just didn't have as much fighting conversion compared to the overall amount of power that they had, and I'm sure every kingdom would hope for. And then that eventually led to TFS leaving, 23, they ended up going to 40, and then you had ANCS that recently left 23 as well as kind of the second main alliance, or at the time, and then later became the first when some of the TFS people left. And then ANCS just left, and I can't recall if they went to 66 or exactly which kingdom. I thought it was somewhere around the 60s. I'm just blanking really hard right now. But they just recently left. And their reason for leaving was more of a rebuild focus. TFS wanted to rebuild as well, but it was more so because of the fact that they just didn't have as much, again, overall fighting engagement into the KVK based on the overall amount of players and power that was available to fight. And a similar thing is happening now, which I've covered and have gone into decent length, where we've talked about and showed people that are migrating in and migrating out of kingdoms. And this is something where in Kingdom 5 with Noor, you have the last couple seasons that have just been lackluster. And I think that's just the easiest way to say it. It's whether you view it as they took a KVK Diplo win, or the numbers or the deck was stacked a little bit more in their favor, where they didn't have, and I'm not just saying them, I'm saying them as in the people that they worked with, but just them as in, you know, easier to say like, oh, hey, this is the captain or just the face of the team. And so because of that, and I believe generally speaking, not just applying to them, is that if you end up taking these kinds of Diplo wins where you stack a deck, or you have more power, you have more T5s, you have more 100 mil pluses, there will be clear advantages. And when you have such clear advantages, it kind of makes sense on why some teams just may opt to not fight as long, to not fight at all, to not engage with you for as many days as you would have liked throughout a KVK season. It's kind of like you're shooting yourself in the foot, and at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword on how you would form teams or how you would form units. We could talk about that later. But yeah, just to kind of give a little bit of clarity here, those are most likely some of the recent situations and scenarios that have been occurring and have played out that Chiz is referring to.
solution to players' inability to make good seasons is to force it on them. Okay, fine. You can't do good matchmaking in Diplo? We'll do it for you. And I think this is an elegant solution, and it fits perfectly because, as I said in my prior video, I think player-led matchmaking in Diplo will always be better, but failing players' level of sophistication and understanding of game state and prioritizing game experience over game rewards and account progression, it's important the developers step in and say, okay, we'll do this for you. And that's what's happening here. But let me explain. You queued up for this KVK, Dragonfall, and
And to be clear here, to really simplify this, essentially what we're talking about is that it would be great if Kingdom teams would look at the data and then anything else beyond that and say, okay, we're going to try and form teams or unions that are all as close in power as we possibly can, regardless of how we might feel about each other, with the exception of egregious acts such as, again, true betrayals or true lying or not showing up when you said you were going to show up. Like, I'm talking really just that level. If those things haven't happened, my view has always been everyone should get into a Diplo room. You share data with everyone shares data. Everyone then provides what they think a appropriate union should look like or team should look like. And then you have people that weigh in and give their feedback, and then you either vote or you just come to a decision. And the idea being is that you should be doing so in a way that will allow for every single player that's going to be participating in that KVK from your alliances that you have a responsibility and you are accountable to make the best matchup in that KVK that will once again allow for the most amount of engagement in PvP and enjoyment throughout the season for up to everyone involved. And that's as simple as it is for me.
Every kingdom gets classified as A, B, C, or D. A's and B's will be fighting together. C's and D's will be fighting together. And you pick who your allies will be. And then the developers pick which other group you will go and fight. So you can see here that at the A and B tier, it's 2A kingdoms and 2B kingdoms that also formed a team together. Now, this is really important you would pick. And there is one other thing I want to mention before I go a little further here, which is that there's also a Paragon realm, which should theoretically prevent a situation that has happened in the past in Rise of Kingdoms, which is match not found. You form a team that's so strong, you don't get a match because you greatly outpower everybody else. So, this brings us to the thing that most people didn't seem to understand about.
And I want to point out here, right, thankfully, there was only 2 kingdoms that did not actually get a match found on this KVK. And that was, let's scroll down here on the matchups that we have, right? So it was 45 and 218 out of the potential 99 kingdoms that could have registered, right? 87 registered at the time when registration ended, but I think that might be a little bit more now because some people once again had told me that some kingdoms unregistered or actually registered afterwards. And so you have 9, I believe we have 9 KVK groups now. And so, again, just wanted to add that in there, right? Which is just to say that the system itself, if you're trying to prevent not founds and to get as many matchups as possible, right? Okay, you did that here. But obviously, we still need more kingdoms in the pool going forward.
This format. And because the BDO fam has a lot of players that are very experienced from Rise of Kingdoms, we immediately knew what an AABB or even AB system was going to mean. And it meant that you needed to do all your homework such that the moment this team up phase opened, you were ready to declare who your allies were going to be. This is an extremely obvious thing when you start to think about what happens when people get taken off the board as potential allies. You lock up good allies, and then the pool of people you can work with gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And you don't want to be the last one left holding the bag, not actually getting to pick who your allies really are because you took too long to figure out who you were going to ally with. Which means the only way you can be ready for matchmaking team up to officially open is if you already know who you might want to ally with. So we went through a very, very deep.
Okay, so what I will say here is he's not wrong. There is kind of 2 sides to this, but I will state that, excuse me, what am I trying to die here, is that everyone knew in advance the kingdoms that were in the pool. That registered. And one, either because you did the research on your own, or if you watched my video, where I showed you, here's all the kingdoms that registered at the moment. Now, sadly, the only way that you could go and find out who was registered is you would have to have a character in each of these kingdoms, and you'd have to have it leveled to a certain point so you could see the KVK icon in the top right, and then it would show you who registered versus who didn't, because it would have a little green border around the KVK chapter or storyline. And so we did a video on this. And at this point, you could then go and look at all the kingdoms if you wanted to go and research, pull your data, etc. And you could then go and start figuring out, who do I want to work with? That opportunity was there. Now, the other side of it, so again, I don't see anything wrong with that. The other side of it is, and this is a little bit more of this is like a little bit more of a realistic versus unrealistic expectation at this point. Because then you would have to look at it and say, okay, well, let's wait until we get to the team up phase, because then the kings and queens, from what I understood or understand, is that they were able to see at that time, excuse me, all the kingdoms that registered, if not potentially before, but I know at least then. And so once you get there, then you could either get every single kingdom into a Diplo room and say, hey, this is what we think would be fair for everyone involved, right? Or even if it's just the ABs, get into a room, and then the CDs get into their own Discord server, and everyone conversates because they want to do the fairest teams. Because keep in mind, in order to make the most balanced matchups in team versus team in SOS3, you have to first and foremost look at all the kingdoms that are in AB and all the kingdoms that are in CD, and then you have to divvy those up into batches of 4 or 6 that would allow for the fairest matchups in team versus team once you get to the team up phase. So the challenge is that, can I say that these are all the fairest teams that they possibly could have been to get us to the fairest teams themselves? No, they're not. That's just a fact. But now that we are here, now that teams are formed, you're only going to be able to match up based on what the current teams that exist. So I just want to be very clear here, because they're right. Like, if I was to redo the alliances, like if I was to look at all the data, which we have, and form teams, which maybe I'll do a video on that as well. So I could say, like, this is what I would have done as teams in order to get the fairest matchups across the board when it came to this team then versus this team. So I just want to be clear there, right? Because there are two ways to do it, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with the way that Chiz is explaining their group doing it, where you're kind of figuring out who you want to work with before the team up phase gets there.
Detailed and rigorous evaluation of who all was queuing and what their true strength is, and that gets to be our sort of secret sauce moving forward, and other kingdoms will figure it out, because it's not rocket science, okay? You go in prepped to pick your allies, and I'm hyped for our allies. Now, I do want to say something very important here, which is that the one thing you really cannot do, and I think a lot of kingdoms fail to understand this, the thing you cannot do is, if somebody says, do you want to ally, to turn around and say, well, let me get back to you on that one. Now, the reason you can't do that is because you just have to assume the other party is not prioritizing you, right? If they wanted to ally you, they'd say, hell yeah, let's do this thing. And who are you going to ally with when you have options? The people who say, why don't you wait a little bit? I got to figure stuff out. Or the person who's like, hell yeah, let's do this. Let's go, baby. You're going to ally the groups that give you the hell yeah. And it's so funny because, look, like, I used to actually swing dance, which is like social dancing, okay? And if you want to meet swing dancing, and not even know, but like, why don't you just stand there and wait? And they just look around. Like, when you put a visual to like what certain kingdoms were doing when they're like, let me get back to you, it's like, bro, that is insane. Okay, is insane. So you need to be deeply informed going into this stage where teams are ultimately formed, okay, in order to make really good choices. And already the people who don't understand the way the system works are complaining that we made such a strong team and that.
Okay, so before we get to that part, again, kind of doubling down on this idea of, when people reach out to you, should you go ahead and just initially accept? Or should you say, well, hang on, let me weigh some options out? Keep in mind, not everyone necessarily is in the same position that another kingdom is in. A kingdom like BDO is, again, a stronger kingdom, right? If we look at their ranking on the board, when it comes to kingdoms for where they are, right? They ranked 5th, and this is based on top 300 player power that was captured on the 7th of December, right? So about a week ago, but prior to the matchup phase that we ended up seeing, and then what we ended up seeing being released for teams that were announced. So they're by no means a weak kingdom. Typically, stronger kingdoms are going to have a little bit more leverage and a little bit more sway when it comes to who they're reaching out to and kingdoms that they already have an idea for. An example of this is that if BDO was to reach out, keep in mind, they're not working with Echo, which technically they could have, because technically they're not a Paragon, right? So the strongest choice they could have worked with would have been, I'm sorry, because they're not Paragon either. So technically they could have worked with EIS or Echo at that point, right, or even LTS, right? Any of those top 3 that they could have, because they're not a Paragon. But my point is that if you're a top kingdom and you reach out to someone, versus if, let's say, you're at the middle of the pack, like maybe, like let's say a POTC, a BXS, an SJT, and you're reaching out to some of these A's, right, and you're like, hey, let's go ahead and work, or again, even if you're like on the lower end of the B's, let me see here, where's like a lower end of a B, right, which would be like I guess that'd be appropriate, like a BXS or an SJT, right? It may not be as, or other kingdoms may not be as reluctant to just immediately say yes. So a lot of it depends on where you rank on the boards, and then at the same time, what are the offers that are already being discussed amongst those kingdoms? So there are multiple things to weigh. I don't really believe it's that cut and dry, unless you already have an idea because you've done the homework on. It's kind of like when a draft is coming around for a sports team, right? And you have like an NBA draft or an NFL draft or an MLB draft. The draft teams are usually doing all the research and prep work before draft day comes. So they know that these are our priority picks top down. If this isn't available, we immediately go to this one. If this isn't available, we immediately go to this one, right? So they have backups to their backups. And I think that's just more of really what Chiz, I think, is hinting at for part of what he's saying, is that kingdoms have the opportunity to go and do that research. It just depends on who's going to do it. And from there, you should have an idea already on here's the kingdoms that we would want to work with, because the beginning stages of once team up phase hits are arguably the most important. And I would tend to agree there, because that's where you're going to have the most amount of options available to you. And then the further that you get in the team up phase, more kingdoms are forming teams, they're forming allies, you lose out on potential opportunities. So being prepped before team up and knowing how you want and knowing who you're looking at in a priority order top down really should be best practice. Now, would it be nice if everyone just got together before team up or in team up, like I said, between the ABs and the CDs, and just tried to figure it all out between them? Yeah. That, I think, would be great if all of that data could be public and whomever did it, right? Or maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll form a team, right? Maybe that's an idea for BN, right? Maybe I'll form a Discord group and get all the kings in there between the different tiers. And I'll just say, hey, here's all the data. Here's my recommendations on teams. Now do with it what you will. But at least no one can say that they didn't see it or could not have viewed it because they didn't have access to it, right? So maybe, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think on that one. Let's continue.
That we rigged the Diplo in our favor, which is a hilarious outing of their misunderstanding of reality. It's like the people who don't understand the game how it works, like they can't help but to out themselves and complain in a way that reveals how much they don't understand. And let me explain. When we were thinking about the way that we could ally for this season, we had several options. Remember, in normal Diplo, you have conversations about both sides of who is going to be allied together. Okay, normal Diplo, which generally doesn't happen in this game. Everybody comes together and they talk about the balance of the teams and they form balanced teams, okay? But in this world, you only have control over one side of this equation, and then you get matched against some other grouping of 4, okay? In that world, you need to understand the possibility space. What is the possibility space? So if we form a strong team, the best case scenario is we get matched up against some other strong team, in which case we have a banger of a season. Maybe we win, maybe we don't, but we formed the strongest team we could with the information we had, with the people who wanted to ride or die with us. That seems like a great outcome, okay? The next possibility is that we formed the most badass team we could, and we don't get matched up against a team that's quite as strong. We have an easier season. It is what it is. We get a win. We move on with life. On to the next season, okay? The worst potential outcome would be that we formed a strong team. Our team actually somehow ends up being too strong, and then we get no match found, in which case we have to queue up for a whole nother cycle, and we lose, like, I don't know, however many weeks of time waiting for the next pop. That would be, in my opinion, the worst case outcome, okay? If we form a strong team, and forming a strong team is the key here, because the other alternative would be that you sandbag and you form a weak team. Now, why would you form a weak team? The reason you would form a weak team.
So I just want to be clear here, right? So just so everyone knows what the numbers look like for BDO's group. I actually just updated this too as well, where I added in some of the ranks. And these ranking numbers that you see are going left to right, so everything's in order, right? So Kong is 48, EIS 61, everything's left to right, everything's in order. So the ranking is where they ranked on the Kingdom board that I did for the top 300 player power, right, on the 7th of December. And so when you look at this, you can see in the total number, basically this number, if you will, the higher the number is, the lower in the rankings that they placed on average. The lower the number is, the lower on the rankings, right? Or I guess 10, when I say lower, I mean like, 1, 2, 3, 4, higher on the rankings. I mean like, 119, 118, 117. But the idea being is that if the number's lower, I'll just say, so it's easier, right? You rank higher, meaning that you have a higher, you have more of a collection of stronger kingdoms. If the number's higher, you have a higher number of lower powered kingdoms, right? That ranked on this list, if that makes sense. So hopefully it does. So basically, the stronger the group would be the lower the number. The weaker the group, or the lower powered group, would be the higher the number. So 65-74. If we look at BDO's group, they actually have the lowest number out of AB at 59, right, for the amount of people that they worked with. However, they're at 85.39 billion. They are also the strongest group by 2.5 to like 2.5-ish billion power, right? The next strongest groups are, again, Kong and RK, right? So these two up here. I just want to be clear here. Like, yes, they did form a strong group, and again, they don't have the most amount of 100 mil pluses and total T5s. That's technically the RK Echo group, or RK Echo GGRAC, right? Or 360, 68, 226. So they have a little bit more power, but this group actually has the most amount of 100 mil pluses and T5s that are above 60 million plus. And again, that data was from the 7th of December. So again, right, so power-wise they do, but just not overall T5s from 60 plus and then 100 million plus. So it could be argued that technically the strongest group is probably the 360, 68, 266 group, but power-wise, it would be, right, 41, 81, 229, 286, right, the BDO group for Chiz. So again, just want to be clear there on some numbers.
Is to avoid no match found, or to avoid fighting the biggest and the baddest. Now, we're not trying to avoid fighting the biggest and the baddest, and we definitely do not want no match found. But a part of the reason we're not as worried about no match found, hopefully, is that the new system they've this team was the unquestionable most logical way to approach this season. Not only does it have the potential for the very best fight possible, but also...
And I wanted to also state something here. If we look at the data, right, and you see the teams that they chose, right? So they chose 5, right? So I believe that's them. 6, 23, and 25. Let's just look at what that looks like. So 5 is them. 6 basically is the third strongest, or I guess technically the fourth option they could have taken. Because like I said, they could have taken... I believe they could have taken any of these. I don't think they absolutely had to have a Paragon unless they absolutely did need to have one. So if that's the case, they could have taken EIS or LTS, right? So 61 or 134 they could have paired with, right? Just to be fair, they could have done that. They didn't. They took the third Paragon option based on power, which was SSG. right? So that's 5 and 6 they took. And then, what did we say, 23, 25? Yeah, so 23, 25. So let's look at what that looks like. So remember, these are the actual classifications that were distributed. So at 23 and 25, they took 2 Bs, WGL, right? WGL and DBB. Is that right? Let me make sure I'm not totally crazy here. Yeah, okay, good. So now where are they? So let's go off the Bs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they took the 5th strongest B option and the 7th strongest B option, right? So again, they took stronger Bs, but they did not take the absolute strongest Bs, right? Now keep in mind, let me be very clear here. They took the 2nd and 3rd strongest Bs. I apologize. Or sorry, 2nd and 4th strongest Bs. Because remember, they can't take the Paragons. So Dawn, from 88, technically would have been the strongest B that they could have taken to pair up with. They didn't. They took the 2nd strongest B in 286 and the 4th strongest B. So if they wanted to take the top 2, it would have been Dawn and WGL, right? So they technically took 2 out of the top 4 strongest Bs, and then they took the 3rd, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the 3rd strongest A option that they could have taken. So, I mean, if you want to say that they, again, took the strongest options available to them, you would technically be correct, right, in saying that. But I also want to be clear, just to be very transparent. The challenge here is, once again, like I stated before, it's not as though these kingdoms are going to take the lowest end options, right? They're probably more so going to take the highest end options available to them, as much as I would like to believe that probably almost everyone would. So, but again, I just want to be transparent and show you the data so you can see these are the options they took and probably how they looked and maybe assessed it.
The possibility of a no match found is pretty low in this situation. Could happen, but it's pretty low. Okay. Now the alternative, as I was describing, is that it's so funny. Whatever we had done, we would have been criticized the baddest, which we're not trying to do. And the biggest and the baddest, which we're not trying to do. It's so funny. Whatever we had done, we would have been criticized for, right? We make a strong team, people cry because we made a strong team. If we make a weak team, people would have mocked us for making a weak team, right? It's hilarious. But if you make a weak team and you end up fighting someone really, really strong, then you could end up losing and you have no one to blame but yourself. You're the one who allied with the weaker people. You got cooked, sucks to suck. And that's not a situation we want to be in. So we definitely did not want to form a weaker team, okay, with the hopes of what people often do when they form weak teams, which is to fight some other weaker team, but they think they still outclass everybody at that tier of power level. And that would be sort of the best case outcome of a sandbag team, is that you fight someone that is, equivalent in power, but actually your punching level is just way higher. And your kingdom is really strong, your ally kingdoms are really weak, and you're just sort of farming KP off the other weaker enemies that you end up fighting. We didn't want that situation either, okay? So once you understand the possibility space, it becomes extremely obvious that the one and only best thing to do was to have been prepared for the Diplo, go in knowing who you want to go to the dance with, and ask them to dance. And hopefully they understand that they should just say yes, because they've done their homework, and they also know who they want to be in this with. So anyways, all that to say...
And so I will say here is that I do tend to agree on this line, is that regardless of who they probably picked, they probably were going to face criticism no matter what. And to be fair, I don't believe it's just extended to BDO. I also believe it's extended to other top teams. I think the amount of data that we've been able to show has allowed for a level of transparency in the game that I don't know if any other kingdom builder has really seen before this early on in a game's life, where we're really showing and explaining to people how matchups are being formed, what is some of the logic behind it, what do the numbers look like before kingdoms match and team up, and were these the best teams that could have been formed, the best matchups that could have been formed based on the data. And that to me, I think, is really important, because it also lends itself to a level of responsibility and accountability from those kings and queens, but also from the game team. So again, I like I said, I do tend to agree here that it most likely also is better that they probably went to form a little bit of a stronger team versus that of a weaker team, just because other top A's or other A's will probably, or I guess just other top kingdoms in the game would probably want to try and play with other tops as well. So, if they opted for something else, it could have skewed it more, not in their favor, where they could have got a little bit more of a mismatch. Right. The number one thing I'm going to say is that we just need more kingdoms. We need more kingdoms in the Season of Strife pool, more than 99, than up to 99. Right. Hopefully next season this number will go to 150, and then we'll get to 200. And over time, when you have more kingdoms in the pool, the variance, the margins will be less. So that way you will be able to hopefully have closer matchups in teams. And then you'll also have more, hopefully more balanced teams as well going forward.
I'm hyped about who we're allied with. I hope we get a tough fight, expectations, and prevents the one thing that the top kingdoms were all doing, which is avoiding real fights to get the easiest wins imaginable. And I don't think that is achievable anymore. I mean, it is. You just go queue for the other form of, a season, right? Go queue for the other formats. That's fine. Hey, there's a place for you to do that cheese, if that's what you want to do. So I think this is really hype. I think this is genuinely going to elevate people's level of understanding of how to approach Diplo. And it removes the side of the equation where things can be just deeply, deeply imbalanced. All right. So this is pretty cool. All in all, really, really hyped scenario your realm will be taking part in, and information. It's AABB. One or the other, right? And when we look at that map again, right, like where you'd place allies and enemies, one possibility that, so if one AB was here and another strength, you have a lot more flexibility to put them around the map. These guys fight. And then the thing is that you would fight the other kingdom, I guess. You fight one kingdom for the zone over here. You fight the other kingdom for the zone, which I don't think is the case. It has sort of implications about each. GG's, man. I am hyped for this season. Like on here, consider subscribing. Look, there's going to be a bunch of the very first team that formed. There's going to be a bunch of people who complain and aren't happy about the fact that we were so dang organized, and this is the very first team that formed for this format, the very first time that it showed up to the game. We'll see how we do, right? We may not win, but that's, as I was saying before, like not necessarily the point. The point is to get good, fair fights. I'm hyped for it. And the funny thing is that I genuinely feel like 95% of the disproportionate effort that happens has now already happened in locking up the team. And like the remaining 5% of influence that we have over the outcome of this season is sort of like a playing out of systems that we've already put in place. Like BDO is already a war machine, man. Like we already have the mechanisms in place for all the things it takes to run a kingdom, to manage, the migrations and all that stuff, right? And I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm just saying like that's all going to play out, and it's going to be, there's just not that much we can do to influence our punch level between sort of like now and when the fights happen. We've done the majority of the work that influences the outcome of this season, and now it all plays out, and it's going to be really interesting. And maybe 95% is like too much. Maybe it's like 80%. Maybe it's even like 60%, but like a huge amount of what you sort of hour for hour get for influence on the outcome comes from this time spent here, in my opinion. Whatever. You enjoyed the vid, throw a like on here, subscribe. You want to see my other videos talking about this topic?
Okay, so final thoughts here is the one thing that, again, Chiz is aware of this, but I imagine he probably just forgot to mention it. There actually is a massive event that happens before KVK finishes that could technically have a large to minimal influence on how the matchups will be. And this is one of the reasons why I have said this already, is that teams should not be matched up until, meaning the results phase, right? So people are aware. Let's go back here. If we can look at the timeline. Does he come off this? Let's see if he comes off this at any point. Here we go. So you have the registration. Kingdoms will register for the storyline. Classification. You get your A, B, C, D tier grade. Team up. You can then form teams. Matchmaking. The system starts to process all the teams that have been formed. And then results, team versus team, right? Which team gets paired with which teams. But then you have Brink of War. And why is Brink of War so important? Well, because you can power up in Brink of War. And often, a lot of kingdoms do. And so, just to say that there is potentially little influence that can happen in the beginning, and then obviously he said up to maybe 40% influence. The challenge here is that you could have a lot of influence, or you could have a little influence. It will depend. But the possibility for having a lot of influence is there. And that could be from just having a lot of people that power up, a lot of people that train more T5s, some people that hit T5. Maybe you have more people that are going to hit the 100 mil plus threshold. Whatever it may be. The teams themselves could also, I'll be very clear here, some teams could get screwed. Because some kingdoms and some teams might power up more than others. And if that happens, you could end up having wider margins and more skewing of what the matchups will look like once we end up getting past Brink of War. This is why I have collected data before Brink of War, and we're going to do it again after Brink of War. This is also why I've said, and I'll say it again, I think that the results phase, or the matchmaking phase, should not start until after Brink of War. So you should have Brink of War, then it should go matchmaking, then it results, and then season begins. Because you could have massive influences, right? Again, you're more likely to power up on Brink of War than you are when Brink of War is not happening, right? Generally speaking. And that's what we've usually seen during BOW events prior to KVK season's beginning. That's the last thing I'll leave you with. Would love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for us. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later. You going to say bye? Okay, latest.